I'm Andrew Kaufman. You're listening to Live Through This. What goes up must come down. That this is obvious kindergarten wisdom doesn't make it any easier to accept. Whether it takes a second or a lifetime, everything returns to earth. And that is what our story is about today. It begins on a tranquil, beautiful day in Spain.
Well, we were goofing off, is what it was. We were having just a great fun in the sun kind of day.
That's Brock Ramsey. All this happened 2 years ago. He's 35, on vacation with his wife, Kristen Chappell, and their 5-year-old son, Ben.
It was fantastic. We were on a break from life. Things had gotten stressful at home, and so we were traveling to forget the worries. And we had gone to a hiking area just outside the city of Granada in Spain, and we went to look at the rocks and the cliffs, and we like rock climbing a little bit, so we went to check that out. It was great. We had a great lunch. It was fantastic. We were on our way out. It was mid-afternoon, and we were on this big wide path, 2-3 meters wide. There was a sharp drop-off, we knew, to the side of us, but there's a big railing along it. Everything was fine. And so we were just having fun, and Ben, our son, was 5 at the time, and he was just banging his hand along the railing like kids do. He was just pushing along on the wooden spokes of the fence, and what we didn't realize was one of those spokes was missing, and there was just some danger tape in the way, and we didn't realize how hard he was pushing on those spokes. And so suddenly, instead of pushing on wood, he was pushing on a piece of tape, and he went right through. He just disappeared. And he obviously called out as he fell, like he screamed as he fell. And then just Kristen went from this was a fun day hiking to this was just the worst thing that's ever happened. It was crazy. I saw her just go straight as a board. Her eyes went wide, and she, I don't know, she just dove after her kid. It was amazing. I was looking across the valley, and my entire family, who had just been standing beside me, was suddenly gone. They had just disappeared. It was just gone. It was like they stepped into space. I remember standing up at the top of that cliff, and I remember thinking, I need to be at the bottom. It was kind of that leap of faith thing where you know you have to do something, and so you say, this is going to happen. Go. And so you take a step and you jump.
You are listening to Live Through This across Canada on CBC Radio 1. Our show this week is called Gravity. That force pulling us down, but also together. This week, our entire show is the story of Brock Ramsey, his wife Kristen, and their son Ben, and what happened after gravity took all 3 of them, 1 accidentally and 2 of them willingly, to the bottom of a jagged cliff in Spain. Stay with us.
Maybe I'm a different breed. Maybe I'm not listening. So baby, I'm ADD, baby.
What I last remembered was having lunch in a canyon at the bottom of a cliff. But when I woke up, it was in hospital, and I was alone and crooked, and I couldn't I remember my leg flopping from side to side and giggling about it. Like, what's wrong with my leg? This is crazy. And I looked up at some faces around me and I said, oh, I don't know you. Is there a man? Is there a boy? And they said no in Spanish. So I didn't know where I was or what had happened, just that I was in pieces and Brock and Ben were missing. And then I blacked out.
So Kristen is alive in a hospital in Spain. It will be a while before she understands what has happened to her, how badly she's been hurt. She doesn't remember that her 5-year-old son has fallen off a cliff, or that she herself jumped after him. But the rest of her memory is intact. She remembers leaving her home in Calgary, going to Spain with her family, and she remembers knowing that there was a good chance they might end up spending their vacation in a hospital. Only, she was pretty sure that if that happened, it would be her husband, Brock, in the hospital bed.
I had been given like a cancer diagnosis a little bit before that, and they had me on chemo for a bit and radiation, and that stuff sucks. And then we got a little bit of a break from it, and so I think we had 4 weeks off. They told us 4 or 5 weeks off, and we were like, okay, let's get out of Dodge, let's get out of here, and just go have some fun and live some life.
Brock's doctors have given him maybe another year of life. The idea of traveling is risky, but the way he and Kristen see it, this vacation could be their last. So they go for it.
And so we went on a trip to Portugal and to Spain. We spent 2 weeks in Portugal, and then we were going to spend 2 weeks in Spain, and we were going to whip into North Africa, and we were going to travel around, and we were going to see what's going on. And the irony is we definitely made sure we had some travel insurance before we went, because we didn't know if I was going to get sick or if I was going to be in trouble, and we're pretty glad we had the travel insurance.
Things obviously haven't turned out as planned. Their needed break from the pressure of Brock's diagnosis has taken a direction that no one could have predicted. For days, Kristen is in critical condition in the hospital, with no memory of anything that's happened.
I remember being taken to a room and all of these strange things were being done to me. People came in and would crank me up to the ceiling and scrub me, and I didn't know why. I didn't realize I had a broken neck and things like that. And I remember Brock and Ben coming, and there was Brock, and he had some scratches on his nose. And I said, oh, what happened? Your nose is all scratched up. And he laughed, and he said, my nose is scratched up. You should see you.
So Kristen's in the hospital recovering. Ben and Brock are around. Now that you know that, we can go back to the part of the story we haven't told you yet, where Brock's standing alone on the top of that cliff, having just witnessed his son and his wife go over it.
I immediately called for them, but the sound I heard back was Ben screaming. Just this horrible, horrible sound that he was making. It was complete fear and just wailing. And I called for Kristen, and she didn't answer, and I called for Ben, and he just kept making this horrible, horrible noise. So my memories of that they're not really visual, they're audio, they're the sound of him. I knew that things were just terrible, and there was no way I was going to hike around and back down to the bridge and down the little gully and then back around to the bottom of this cliff. I knew that wasn't really a possibility, so I kind of aimed for a bush, which I thought was maybe a better idea than just jumping into nothing. But I mean, you take a step and you jump off. And then I fell. Gravity was working pretty strong that day.
The drop is more than 10 meters, 3 or 4 stories straight down onto jagged rocks.
I ended up in the bush. I jumped off the cliff and ended up in this bush. And poor Ben, because I was fine, but it was a thorn bush, which was probably not good planning on my part. But I came out of it really scraped up. I probably looked like Edward Scissorhands, but it was all just superficial stuff. But I came out of that bush, and I saw Ben first, and he was standing there still making this screaming sound. I saw the look in his eyes, and then I followed the look that he was looking at, and that was Kristen, just face down in the pool of water, and face down in Ben called it tomato soup. She looked like she was face down in a puddle of tomato soup. What we're thinking has happened is Ben fell off the cliff and he kind of landed on his back in this pool of water, maybe 2-3 inches of water. And maybe he was made of rubber at the time, or maybe this is the closest thing I've ever seen to a miracle, but he wasn't hurt at all. He got wet. There wasn't a scratch on him. There wasn't a bruise. That's it. He hit the water and he jumped right back up. By the time I got down there, he was on his feet. But that didn't happen for Kristen. She went off and she caught her leg around this tree branch that was kind of, lodged along the cliff, and then that swung her head around, and so instead of falling feet first, she was now falling face first.
Just seconds after Ben lands, his mother drops down the same cliff and hits the bottom just meters away from where he's standing.
He found me right beside him in the water. I landed on a rock right beside him, and luckily he landed in a few inches of water, so he was okay. But I hit a boulder with my face and broke my leg on the way down. So I broke both the bones in my leg. They were sticking out of my skin, and smashed up the other knee, broke my neck. My face was apparently ripped in half. My nose was on either side of my face. Teeth missing. And Brock had to pull me from the water right beside where Ben was screaming, and blood was just everywhere.
I don't know. I must have hesitated. I have no idea what time passed, but anyways, I just grabbed her and I hauled her onto the bank, and I turned her over, and I guess she had inhaled a bunch of water, and I don't think she was breathing at that point. And I remember trying to pull her nose back together, because you know how you're supposed to pinch someone's nose before you start doing artificial respiration. And then I did like the first blow into her mouth, but then she started coughing pretty quickly, and that was a pretty glorious sound.
So Kristen is breathing again, and within minutes, some climbers and then paramedics arrive, and she's evacuated to hospital. She's in critical condition, lost a lot of blood, ends up needing transfusions. But after a few days, she's out of intensive care. And although the impact broke her neck, her spinal cord is intact. She's not going to be paralyzed.
I was alone a lot with my thoughts, and it was kind of like a 2-week meditation, just being alone, unable to move in a bed. It was actually really cathartic. I just found this inner strength and an inner peace, and was so thankful once I learned what had happened to be alive. I've been told I was the best person I've ever been at that time, and I just felt like everything made sense, and everything that was supposed to have happened, and I just felt looked after, and I didn't worry about the future. Everything was exactly in the present moment. And the food in the Spain hospital was so good. And I would celebrate these things like the broiled fish and fresh vegetables. And they'd bring you a cappuccino in the morning. And those little things were so good. And I was in a lot of pain. And that didn't seem to matter. It was strange, this sense of wonder about the world that came over me, and just thankfulness of being alive.
So Kristen's injuries are no longer life-threatening. But while she's convalescing in the hospital, Brock doesn't know what to do. Just days ago, he was grappling with his own cancer diagnosis. Now his wife is seriously injured, and his 5-year-old son has just been through an incredibly traumatic experience.
I was lost. I was a mess, and I didn't even realize it, how crazy the situation was, how messed up I was. Grenada is amazing. What a beautiful place. It's probably got the least amount of English of any place I've ever been in my life. But boy, did it make things tough at the time. Like, and my traveler Spanish, I didn't know the word for hospital administration services or medical insurance. Like, these things didn't work their way into my like little courses.
Having just jumped off a cliff to save his family, Brock now finds himself isolated in a foreign country with a wife in critical care. The only people he knows in Spain are a couple they met just before the accident. He doesn't know them that well, but what can he do? He's desperate. He asks for help.
Yeah, they took us in. They saved our lives. They fed us and they translated for us and they looked after Ben when I had to be with Kristen, and they stayed up with me till all hours of the night when I couldn't sleep. And it was just amazing.
Once they found out that I was going to be okay, a doctor sat Brock down and said, someone that spoke English, I think the only one in the hospital, told Brock that I'll be okay, that everything's going to be okay. And after that first few days of, Brock's own trauma, this climbing family that had rescued them somehow turned this 2-week hospital stay into a bit of a adventure for them. They went on this double-decker bus almost every day for hours and hours, and that was what Ben loved to do. He loved to watch these, the Green Cross pharmacy signs, and there's a picture of Ben on his little booster car seat, and Brock just plunked him in front of that for a couple hours, and he watched the pharmacy sign flashing, and the climbing family took them every day, out on excursions to caves and kind of like a celebration of life. And they would stay up late drinking wine and sharing some of the food of Spain. And really they saved Brock and Ben from what could have been a traumatic life experience.
Takes about 2 weeks, but the doctors eventually decide that Kristen is well enough to be medically evacuated back to Canada, where she can continue her recovery.
After we ended up back in Calgary, we knew everything was going to be okay. We had doctors telling us that there was going to be a long recovery for Kristen, but that she was going to end up fine. So that was great. I mean, she had, I don't know how many surgeries, plastic surgeries and all that kind of stuff, reconstruction stuff. They shoved teeth back in her mouth and things like that. But I couldn't sleep really well. I kept seeing it over and over in my head.
Brock isn't the only one who can't shake the memory of what happened that day off that cliff in Spain. Kristen has always been afraid of heights, and the idea that she would willingly throw herself off the top of a cliff to save her son, well, she can't imagine how she actually did something like that.
That has impacted me so much. I like to sneak into his room at night and just watch him breathe and just look at him in total awe that, oh, wow, the amount I must love this person to be able to do that. It really puts my life into perspective and the power of motherhood and being a mother to somebody. It's just amazing to me, that feeling of loving somebody so much and having this complete instinct which was absolutely ridiculous and not the right thing to do, but I feel kind of proud that I love him that much, and it feels like just a really special bond that we have, that I feel that way about him, so it's kind of cool.
We went back to Spain when Kristen could walk again. We actually went back there. It was a pretty wild experience. I had some demons to purge. And I remember just being, it's not thought, it's just kind of feelings about how weird something can be.
To stand at the top of the cliff and still see my footprint. I wore the same pair of shoes because no other shoes would fit my broken boned foot. And it's an arid place in Spain. And 4 months later, my footprint was still there, and I lined up my shoe and looked exactly where I jumped off the cliff. That was pretty crazy. And we each threw a rock from where we jumped. And not hearing it land, that's what I remember thinking, holy cow, that's far. It was really amazing to stand on top of that and look at the tiny little creek below it and realize fully what a miracle it was that Ben is fine, that Ben didn't have a scratch or bruise on him. What was neat was going down to the bottom where we would have landed and seeing this big rock, and it was stained red, and I'm sure that was my blood. To me, there was my blood on the rock, and Ben and I each took a rock from the bottom of that creek where we landed, and I hold it when I get nervous or scared, or like, to me it's a special place that my life was safe there. So
Now, all this happened over 2 years ago. The family is back home in Calgary. Ben, who was 5 at the time of the accident, is now 8 years old. So, how's he doing?
Really well, all things considered. For a while, Ben was drawing a lot of pictures of. It was fun because he'd say, "Hey," there'd be this like little blocky outline, and there'd be a couple people on the page, and he'd say, "Look, Dad, there's you, and look, there's me, and this squiggle at the bottom of this block, that's Mom. See how it's black and red and blue." And we kind of kept those for the psychologist to go over in a little bit. He drew a bunch of those, and then I think what happened is because of how well the rest of that story turned out, I think actually it almost turned into a good experience. I think once everyone knew that everyone was okay, it became an okay thing again. And I think he turned out fine. Little monkey, we can't keep him off rocks now. It's kind of problematic. He thinks he can climb everything.
So Ben has become a fearless climber, and Kristen had her brush with death and survived.
It's hard because at the same time I've had the second lease on life. Brock's been given a timeline on his. So it's this strange pendulum swinging back and forth. But it also makes you realize that anything can happen at any time to anyone, and just as much as you can to live in the present day and celebrate what you have. Like Brock was given a 2-year timeline 3 years ago, and he's still here and making the most of every day. And he inspires me. Sometimes I forget to slow down, and I try to recapture those feelings that I had about living in the present and celebrating every moment. And I look to Brock actually now for that inspiration, because that's how he lives his life.
I didn't realize how much stuff there was in life, and after it I realized how quickly things can change and how important the people around you are. And it was a pretty good eye-opener for me. That was something.
There is a house built out of stone, wooden floors, walls, and window sills.
Kristen is now fully recovered from all of her injuries. Brock still has cancer, but he spent the summer climbing rocks in the Rockies with his son, Ben.
This is a place where I don't feel alone. This is a place where I feel at home.
When it was time to leave the Spain hospital and be medically evacuated home to Canada, Brock arranged it so I had one night in a hotel room one night to say goodbye to Spain. And
One night that wasn't in a hospital.
yeah, he came into the hospital room and he busted open the door with his foot. And he had the wheelchair that he'd rented in front of him. And he said, let's blow this popsicle stand, and got me in the wheelchair and had a cab waiting. And we cranked the tunes in the cab and we wandered around Spain, being in a hospital. And he took me for croissants and whatever in downtown Granada. And that just shows Brock's specialness, that he wanted me to have that experience. And I had blood everywhere in my hair and sticks, and I hadn't had a bath in 2 weeks and missing teeth, and people stared at me like I was a pirate.
Crazy witch lady. We scared a lot of children.
And we
that
just
was fun.
had this beautiful family moment at Goodbye Spain with me with no teeth and this crazy hair and in a wheelchair. And
Spain's a great place. Spain is a good place.
that was really nice that Brock gave me that gift before we came home.
You've been listening to Live Through This on CBC Radio 1. The show is produced by Deanne Eros and David McDougall. I'm Andrew Kaufman. This is To Build a Home by the Cinematic Orchestra.
Out in the garden where we planted the seeds, there is a tree as old as me. Branches were sold by the color of green. The ground had a rose then past its knees. By the cracks of his skin I climbed to the dawn. I climbed the tree to see the world. When the guys came around to blow